This episode may contain content of a graphic nature, including descriptions of physical and sexual violence against adults, children, and animals. Listener discretion is advised. Hi everyone, I'm Talia.
And I'm Tanya.
And together we are Crimes and Consequences, a true crime podcast.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Crimes and Consequences. I'm Tanya.
And I'm Talia.
And we're a couple of friends who are also lawyers who like to discuss true crime.
Yes, we do. All the time.
All the time. So before we get into today's episode, I would just like to remind everyone to hit the subscribe or follow button or like or whatever it is.
Whatever it is. I don't even know what it is anymore.
And are you ready to hear a crazy story today?
Is it going to be crazy?
A little crazy, yeah.
Is it gruesome?
It's not gruesome, but it's still pretty messed up.
Okay.
Okay?
All right, I'm ready.
So this episode was suggested to us by one of our Patreon members named Compton B.
Thank you, Compton B.
I would like to thank them. This takes place on the 4th of July weekend in 1951.
Okay, so it's an older case.
It's an older case.
I like those older cases, though.
And you know, on 4th of July, it's a holiday here in the U.S., and it's our Independence Day. We celebrate usually with barbecue, so lots of food, fireworks.
Beer.
Yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately, though, for this family, it was not going to be a celebration. So July 5th, 1951, it started off as an ordinary day for Betty Jean Hansen and her family. She had plans to go to the beach with her mom and her younger sister, but unfortunately, tragedy struck, and it turned out to be a day that the family would never forget.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
So let me give you a little background information.
Okay.
In 1937, a woman named Margaret Frances Thomas started living with a house painter named Frank Walter Christie, and they started living as husband and wife. So they had a common law marriage. Although, you know, and they never did a marriage ceremony. So they never really officially did it. But back then, the law usually would
had
recognize.
Common law. Mm-hmm. Now they don't have common law,
right.
At least not in Michigan.
Yeah, not in Michigan. Not since the 50s.
I think most states don't have that either.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, probably not. It just makes things messy, probably according to the law. So Margaret had two small kids from a previous relationship. One was Betty Jean Hansen and her brother Raymond. In December 1937, Margaret gave birth to Frank's daughter, Helen. So now we have a younger sibling.
Okay. She has 3 kids.
Right. And when she had Helen, because it was so long ago, the details are really murky as far as, what actually happened. But in some accounts, it said that Betty Jean and her brother Raymond were in foster care. One said that they were living with her sister during the time that she met Frank, but she gives birth.
She didn't have them. The point is she didn't have them with her.
And she gives birth to Helen. And eventually they do reunite. So the family is living together. But either way, Betty and Raymond went to Downey, California to join their mom and Frank in about 1940 or 1941. Okay, so that's when they all started to live together as a family. They stayed together until there was one point where Frank told Margaret that she had to leave. And this is about 1950. So they stayed together maybe 9 or 10 years.
And then he kicks her out. He's like,
and then
he
said, yep, she's got to leave.
You're done.
And I don't know why he asked her to leave, but Margaret left, and she only took Helen with her, the youngest.
Took one kid.
She took one kid. So she left Betty Jean and Raymond behind. So they lived with Frank for about a year without seeing their mom at all.
Although isn't he their stepdad?
Yeah, he's their stepdad. And Betty Jean did talk to her mom on the phone occasionally, but the kids never saw their mom in person for that year. Eventually, Margaret moved back with the family.
That's awkward.
I know. In June of 1951, even after Betty told her a week earlier that Frank had been
seeing somebody else?
No, molesting her,
what?
Betty. And she's 20 at the time. Not that I'm saying it's okay, but they'd been living, I don't know when it started.
Who's 20?
Betty Jean in
Betty
1951.
Jean
Yes.
is telling her mom that Frank and her are having sexual relations.
Yes. And I don't think she was willfully doing it. And this is a week before Margaret moves back home in June. A few days after her return to the family home, Margaret received her paycheck. And when she got home, Frank was there and they started either arguing or having some kind of discussion about what bills were supposed to be paid with her paycheck. And the conversation led into an argument, during which Frank then admitted to Margaret that he had been molesting Betty.
He admitted this?
Yeah, and that he was going to continue to do so as long as Betty lived in the house. And basically told her there's nothing you can do about it.
What the fuck is this about?
I know. And Margaret's like...
Yeah, she could call the police. It's illegal. I don't care if it's 1950.
Right.
It's horrible.
Right. And Margaret said, no, you're not. And Frank said, yeah, well, yes, I am. And if you don't like it, you can leave. So pack your shit and go. Margaret is like, well, I'm not going anywhere.
Well,
and
I would just go and take Betty Jean with me. That's what I would do.
Right.
Betty, let's go. Get a job. We're out.
Right. Like, that's what you would think that she does, but she doesn't.
Okay. This is all
so Betty gets home, because Betty did have a job. Betty gets home, and Margaret tells her what Frank said to her. And, you know, about that he was going to continue relations with her. And Betty Jean told
Raping her.
Yeah. Betty Jean told her no. Betty Jean told him, no, you won't, Daddy. You're not touching me another time.
Good for her, but I wouldn't. Get out
I
of
know,
here.
right? So Frank then said, you can all pack your shit and go. And once he realized they started doing it, once he realized that, he begged them all to stay. And then they did.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
Please stay.
It won't, nothing will happen, whatever. But, you know, things don't stay calm for long. So after this incident, things began to escalate. Frank would drink excessively and threaten Margaret and Betty Jean with violence. He even threatened where he said, quote, if Betty leaves this house, I'll kill her, end quote. Confronted with that fact, Margaret told Frank that, you know, you're not going to be able to get away with it if you do that. And he said, well, if you try to interfere, I'm going to kill you too. And now you think this is the big red flag, like, let's get out of here?
What?
No.
The hell?
Nope. Everyone is still continuing to live together in this house. On June 23rd, for reasons I don't know, Margaret invited Frank to go square dancing with her and the kids. But he said, well, I need to make a phone call first before we go, before I can really commit to whether I can go to the dance or not. So he was on the phone with someone, and Margaret is listening in on the conversation, and she heard Frank said, quote, well, my son likes to shoot too. Okay.
So is he talking about Raymond?
I don't know. He's just talking about a gun, and Margaret's confused. And she said, you know, earlier that day, she had seen Frank rip something out of the newspaper, like an advertisement. So she went and got another one, and she compared, and it was an ad for a gun. So she's like, oh, is he going to buy a gun? Right? And Frank did call the advertising, whatever the entity was.
The ad on the paper.
The ad on the paper. And it was for a small gun, like a handgun.
That's another big red flag.
Yeah. And everybody stays living in this house. Just to remind everyone. On July 3rd.
That's so sad.
I know. On July 3rd, Frank announced that he was going to make it a real 4th of July and not just with fireworks, is what he said. So
what the hell does that mean?
I know.
What's that mean?
I know. And when he was asked what did he mean by that, he said that he was going to kill Betty Jean on the 4th of July.
To who? Who did he say that to?
I'm not sure if he said it to Margaret. I believe he said it to Margaret. And again, everyone stays in the house. Well, the 4th of July comes and goes. But as we started on the story, July 5th, 1951, Betty Jean had plans to go with her mom and Helen. They were going to go to Long Beach for the day and swim. It was probably a beautiful day in July.
Oh, yeah. Long Beach is nice.
Mm-hmm. They went and got some food, and afterward they come back to the house where while they were out, they had bought a new bathing suit for Helen, but the buttons or something needed to be rearranged on it, and Margaret was sitting in the living room. She was sewing or doing whatever she was doing to the bathing suit.
Fixing it.
Yep, fixing it up. And the girls were doing the dishes in the kitchen. Frank's there. And casually, Margaret mentions that she's going to take the girls swimming, like after they get done. And Frank was sitting in the living room. And without saying anything, he then goes into the bedroom or the back porch. It was in the back of the house, so I'm not sure exactly where he went. He comes back to the kitchen. There, he pulls a gun out of his shirt. And he said, "You didn't think I had a gun, did you?" He says this to Margaret. So Margaret jumps up and she gets between Betty and him. And Frank told her, "You need to get out of the way.
So I can kill your daughter."
Yeah, so I can kill your daughter. And while he's saying this, he has the gun pointed still at
Betty Jean.
Yeah, Betty Jean. Seeing the gun, Margaret said to him, "Frank," she said, "for God's sake, don't do anything drastic. Like, what the hell's going on here?"
And there wasn't even any provocation at the time?
No.
Like, no fighting back and forth?
Nope.
No, just Frank's just probably drunk.
Yeah, he might be drunk, and I don't know. He didn't want them to leave to go to the beach. I don't know. Like, it was just weird. And so when she says that, don't do anything drastic, he said, she should be pleading for her life and not you. And he was meaning Betty Jean. Yeah. So this is all happening. So the four of them are in the kitchen. It's Betty Jean and Helen, the girls, Margaret and Frank. And the youngest child, Helen, she's finally fed up with him, like, always threatening her sister. So she went to the kitchen drawer and she grabbed a knife and she confronted her dad.
What is she, like 11 now or something?
I'm thinking they're closer in age than you might think. I'm thinking they were little when Helen was born. Raymond, like, I don't know where Raymond is in all of this either, but Betty Jean was probably young. I'm thinking Helen is probably around 15-ish. Okay. Give or take. I don't have exact dates, unfortunately, because the story was so long ago, but she was not a little kid, but she's also not an adult. She's a teenager. And here she has a knife in her hand and she's confronting her dad. She was hiding it behind her back. And when she said this, that she comes out and she confronts her dad and she says to him, "I have a butcher's knife. And if you lay a hand on Betty, I'm going to cut your throat from ear to ear."
Oh, shit.
Yeah. So, like, what?
Shit.
Mm-hmm. She was serious.
Yeah.
Of course, now, so it's just chaos. And Frank is now yelling at Margaret that she's turned the kids against him. Like,
let's see, you're raping Betty Jean.
Yeah, and you're threatening to kill her.
He hasn't done anything to Helen.
I know, right? So somehow the situation de-escalates. And they, cooler heads maybe prevail or what have you. But Margaret does notice that the phone lines had been cut. And Frank was like, "Yeah, that was me." And he fixes them by taping them together. However, the calm of the storm does not last.
Oh, yeah, surprise.
And eventually, Frank snaps. He I told you he had been molesting her for years.
Mm-hmm.
And now he's feeling like he's losing control.
And he is.
Betty Jean had recently got a job as a secretary, and she had a full-time job, and then she also had a car of her own, and that meant she was going to have some freedom and some independence.
And eventually she's going to move out.
Yeah.
She's going to find somebody.
Right, exactly. So he decides that he's going to act on his threats. So at some point in the evening, he grabs Betty's purse and her car keys and then went into the living room and he grabs Betty Jean and they go outside. He grabs her.
So he drags her outside.
Margaret begs him, "Please don't do anything to Betty Jean, please." And he said that he was going to make her drive about 10 miles away. He said he was going to kill himself and make Betty Jean watch. And then he would let her, obviously he'd be dead, but then she could come back.
All right,
to the
well,
family
it's not
house.
that bad of a deal.
Yeah. And he said that if they all didn't comply peacefully, that...
Because he's a horrible person, for the record.
Exactly. That he's going to kill everybody in the house. Like, do not call the police, do not, follow us or whatever.
But I wouldn't trust him.
I know.
Hell no.
Right?
Oh, you're just going to kill yourself and make Betty Jean watch.
Exactly.
No, that's not going to happen.
That just seems weird, right? Why don't you just
I
do
like
it
how
here
he's
then?
sharing the story, like
Yeah.
everything he's going to do to Margaret in advance.
Right. And just waving.
And I'm molesting her and I'm doing all these things.
Right. And just waving the gun around, threatening everybody. That it's just insane. So he told Margaret, if you call the police, I'm going to shoot Betty Jean, just right on the spot. So Margaret said, well, can I at least kiss Betty Jean goodbye before you go? And he's like, nope. So instead, Margaret was forced to watch Betty drive away from their home with Frank in the passenger seat. And they took Betty Jean's vehicle. They're driving away.
No, why don't she just call the police once they're gone?
Well, she did, but she waited about 2 hours. And she then called the LA County Sheriff's Department to report what had happened. And an APB, all points bulletin, was put out on the car, which was a 1942 green Ford Coupe, which was owned by Betty. The car was found eventually at McCarran Field, which is on the road from LA to Las Vegas. Okay. So they're in like southern,
California?
They're in Southern California. So the car is found in McCarran Field. And I think actually isn't the airport named McCarran Airport in Las Vegas? I can't remember. It sounds really familiar.
I've been there a lot. I don't remember that.
I think it is, but
I don't remember shit.
Anyway,
so.
But it's not found until July 9th. So this is 4 days later from when Frank and Betty Jean disappeared in her car. So a county employee first noticed the car on Friday the 6th, which was the day after, but he didn't report it until he noticed that it was still there on Monday. So it kind of sat the weekend. And when he probably had the weekend off, and when he came back to work, he was like, oh no, that car's still there. So he called the police. So Deputy Sheriff Lloyd Bell of Clark County, Nevada, was called to check it out. And Sheriff Bell searched the vehicle. He found a bullet casing on the ledge between the back seat and the back window. So,
okay,
I'm thinking it might be the one in the back, right?
Well, the back seat and the back window, like
that little
edge.
space.
Yeah, like they used to have.
Mm-hmm.
Now with our SUVs and stuff,
right? Nobody has that, right?
Not many.
He then collected the evidence and he put it in an envelope and sent it to another deputy sheriff. And then they had the car impounded. And this was July 14th. So this is now, was that 9? No. Yeah, 9 days.
Yeah.
After.
I'm not good at math.
I know, I'm terrible.
Yeah.
So when police were searching for Frank and Betty, the daily newspapers labeled Frank as Creepy Christie.
What's that mean?
Just that was his nickname.
Creepy Christie?
Creepy Christie, because that's his last name.
Oh, okay.
And they started reporting on his obsession with his stepdaughter. Like, that's what they zeroed in on because it's salacious.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it's a wild story.
And he was obsessed with her.
He was. And according to Margaret, Frank was really possessive of Betty and wouldn't allow her to have boyfriends due to his jealousy. He also kept 2 really vicious dogs on their property that were allowed to roam free. So Betty sometimes was afraid,
I can't believe that Margaret left her.
I know.
Left her with.
I know. I know. They had a sign on their front gate which warned visitors to ring the bell before they came in, and it was probably because of these dogs. And at one point, this is really creepy Christie behavior because he got Betty Jean's name.
Don't say tattooed on him.
Yep,
I
on
knew
his
it.
shoulder. I know, right?
What the hell?
Like, parents get their kids' names tattooed, which is all nice,
okay,
but where's Helen's name? Right? I mean, no, it's weird.
The rest of the family thought of all this.
I know. Like,
And
it feels
his
so
friends.
bad, right? Yeah, his friends too. Like, what the hell, dude? Why are you getting Betty's name?
And nobody else's.
And nobody else's. Anyway,
Mm-hmm.
on July 13th, the Hill family stopped off Highway 6 for a little break. And while the children were running off some extra energy, they made a really gruesome discovery.
I knew you were going to say that.
There was a body in the gully that they were near that they thought initially was a man at first. So the kids ran back to tell their dad, what they found.
A man or a mannequin?
A man.
A man.
Yeah.
Okay.
So their dad went to check it out for himself. And once he realized that it was a body, he packed the family back up into the car and they drove to either look for a phone or a police car so that they could report what they had found. Luckily, it wasn't long before they ran into a highway patrolman, Officer Nelson, and they told him about, what they had found. The family said, we'll lead you back to the spot where we found a body, and the officer called it in. More deputies, sheriffs were sent to the scene. 9 days after she was reported missing, Betty had finally been located. She was wearing a green and white checkered gingham dress.
Is that what she was wearing when she was missing?
Yeah, that's what she was wearing when she left the house. Yeah. And they found a wristwatch with the name Betty Jean Hansen engraved on it. Near her body was found a silver cigarette lighter with the initials FWK for Frank Walter Christie. And he had that on him, obviously, when he and Betty left the house on July 5th. At the top of an embankment above where Betty's body was found, they also discovered a pair of blue slippers that she was wearing the night that she disappeared and a pearl necklace. They didn't find a gun with her body, but they noticed that a ring was taken off one of her fingers.
And was she shot?
Yeah, they couldn't see that initially from when they first found her body due to the state of decomposition. But yes, when they did the autopsy, that was done the same day. The pathologist determined that her cause of death was by a bullet shot to the head. It entered her left temple and lodged in the back of her head on the right side. So the bullet fragment was sent to the sheriff's crime lab, and they took fingerprints, and that's how they positively identified her. Yeah. I know. The ballistics expert determined that the bullet was a .25 caliber from a handgun, which is pretty small caliber, and that's probably why it didn't exit when she was shot. Depends, I guess, on how far away.
I don't know much about all that.
Yeah,
shit.
When they're small, sometimes they don't come out. There might be an entrance wound, but sometimes there's not an exit wound. An LA County deputy sheriff went to Nevada to examine the car, and he found multiple reddish brown spots inside the car, and it also appeared as if the car had been washed recently.
On the outside and inside, or just the
outside?
Outside.
Yeah. He collected the shell casing from the officers in Nevada, and he had the reddish brown spots, checked to see what they were, and they were found to be blood. The samples were then sent to LA, and it was proved that the blood was human. However, they were unclear as to how long the blood had been there, and the guess was that it had been there for at least a week.
Well, they know the car was spotted there on the 6th, right? And it was left there.
So
it has to have been around that time.
So they said, it'd been there at least a week, but no more than 10 days. So Betty Jean was laid to rest at the Downey District Cemetery, and she's actually still there today. Her mom, brother, sister, and about 15 friends were in attendance, along with 2 sheriff's deputies. They were hoping that Frank would show up to the funeral, but he didn't, because now you got to remember, Frank's out there somewhere. Yeah, he's on the loose. So a big manhunt for Frank continued, and the FBI joined the search. He was now being charged not only with kidnapping, but unlawful flight to avoid persecution, and probably murder too, because she was shot. Finally, on July 25th, 1951, Frank was finally caught and arrested because a man named Bob Hammond from Sterling, Colorado, recognized him after seeing his picture on a wanted poster around town.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I always wonder if those ever led to people being captured. And yeah,
they do.
They do.
They do.
So once Frank was arrested, he tried to shift the blame from himself, as murderers usually do. He tried to make it seem as if his sexual abuse on Betty was consensual and that they were having a love affair. Mm-hmm. Yeah. He said, "I've raised Betty from the time I took her from my wife's sister. My wife objected to the attention I paid Betty through the years." Well, yeah, that's creepy. So
I don't know what to say. It was consensual, but I raised her.
No, that's not consent.
It's like Woody Allen.
For real, right? Right? Ugh. He also said that Betty devoted all of her time to me and didn't go around with the boys. She wanted to leave, but in such a manner that her mother wouldn't object. I don't know exactly what that means, but like maybe leave the house, but she didn't want to leave her mom. I don't know. Unfortunately, the LA Times decided to refer to the years of sexual abuse as a love affair. Like that's what they printed in the newspaper.
That's so wrong.
I know.
On so many levels. I don't even need to explain how wrong that is.
I know.
It's so wrong.
I know. I want to say, it was only 1951 and...
No.
But it's
no,
still
Tanya.
Wrong. I know.
That's her dad.
Right?
That's
absolutely. No, I agree with you.
Thinks.
I'm trying to figure out why they did it, but they wrote that... the 20-year-old Betty Jean Hansen's death was the climax of a love affair with her stepfather.
That is so wrong.
So they sensationalized it. Frank was extradited from Colorado to stand trial in Los Angeles for Betty's murder. On August 3rd, 1951, a deputy sheriff was sent to Denver to return Frank to L.A. While speaking to the L.A. deputy sheriff, Frank now he's denying having sex with Betty. And he denied that they were in a car. He said that they were in the car when the gun went off. That's what I'm saying. He denied shooting her directly. He's saying they were in the car when the gun went off, that it was an accident and that it wasn't murder.
Okay, even though he had threatened to kill her before.
Oh, yeah.
And pointed a gun
constantly, threatening to kill her. He said he didn't know how his cigarette lighter got near Betty's body.
I don't know.
He said, I didn't even know I lost
me.
it. Maybe she's stolen. I don't know, right?
So full of shit.
Yeah. He claimed that he left his pants on some bleachers in Vegas and bought new ones. Like he didn't have the outfit that he wore when they left. He's like, oh, I just bought some new stuff and I left him behind.
Because there was blood probably all over his clothes.
Probably, right?
Come on, Frank.
He even denied looking to purchase a gun at the time when he bought the one that he owned. Instead, he said, I just happened to meet this guy that was selling one and I bought it. Like it was just all coincidental. Because he's trying to say,
premeditated.
Yes, it wasn't premeditated. That's exactly what he's trying to do. Like, oh, it just, because so many people show up in my life offering
guns.
Yeah, offering
Would
to
you like
buy a
to
gun.
buy this
right.
gun?
It happens all the time.
Why not?
On August 15th, the officers took Frank to the spot where Betty was found, and he refused to go near the gully. He told them that after the gun went off, she fell down, and he waited about 3 minutes listening to see if there were any sounds of life, to see if she was still alive, and then he just left.
He couldn't call the police?
No.
You can go find a highway patrol officer like the Hill family did?
Right. No, he just left her.
Just
left her there. His original trial was set to be held on October 16th, 1951, where he pled not guilty. And he pled not guilty by insanity.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. It's the coverall, I guess, for people, right?
Frank is an asshole. And I would just like to make that clear.
Just reiterate it. Yeah, definitely a big time asshole.
Hate Frank.
Me too. He eventually was found guilty of first-degree murder, and he was sentenced to life in prison. He appealed the conviction, claiming that the evidence of the blood spots and the bullet casing that were found in the car should have been struck from evidence because they weren't relevant or material to the case.
What?
Yeah.
What?
I know. He also said the district attorney was guilty of prejudicial misconduct because he brought up an old forgery charge that Frank had previously served time for.
I do think now that would be not allowed because that would be more prejudicial than probative.
Than probative, yes. Yeah, former bad acts.
Yeah.
Yeah. The appeal was published on June 17, 1952. During the appeal process, Frank testified on his own behalf, and he used this as an opportunity to deny everything and paint himself to be an innocent man. He now denied all claims that he was having sex with Betty, saying that Margaret was constantly accusing them of sleeping together, but it was untrue. Even though he'd previously testified that he and Betty were having sex, but it was consensual.
Right.
So now he's just completely...
He's a killer and a liar. Surprise.
Yeah, surprise. He then denied ever threatening Betty or the family, and said he bought the gun for Raymond to be able to protect the girls when he wasn't home. He said the gun really actually doesn't even work. So the phone call that Margaret overheard where he was talking about the gun, he was actually on the phone with a gunsmith about getting the gun repaired, not purchasing one.
Well, they never found the gun, though, so...
Right. He also had a news story about the day he kidnapped Betty. He said she went of her own free will, and he'd never threatened her. He never threatened her with a gun. And he never said to Margaret, don't ever call the police. He didn't do any of that.
Well, how does he think she got shot?
I know. Well, he said...
The gun doesn't work.
Yeah, he and Betty were driving, but they stopped at a store where he could buy some whiskey. She asked she asked him to call her mom to let her know that everything was okay, which he said he did, but the phone call didn't go through. So they continued on whatever trip they were headed. They stopped off on Highway 6 so Betty could rest. Getting out of the car, to stretch her legs because they heard a noise and they wanted to know what it was.
With a car?
Mm-hmm. Frank said Betty wanted to go back home, but he wanted to go to Reno. She said she didn't have any clothes. He said, oh, don't worry. That's where they were headed, supposedly. He said, don't worry. I'll buy you new clothes when we get to Reno. But when she tried to get into the car, a struggle ensued is what he said. I don't know. I can't picture it. But he said, he's trying to hold her back and she's trying to get in the car and now they're struggling. That's when the gun fell out of his shirt. So he picked it up and he was picking it back up, I guess, bringing it back up. And that's when it went off and shot Betty. He said Betty then rolled down into the gully and he waited about 3 minutes. So that part I do think is true because now you said it twice.
He is waiting 3 minutes to make sure she's dead.
Yeah. He called out to her several times. But when she didn't answer, he got scared and he jumped in the car and drove away. As he drove further away, he stopped to get food, but at some point he threw the gun out the window. And then when he got to Vegas, he parked the car and he abandoned it. So he's saying that's exactly what happened, which thinks is a bunch of shit.
So which I think is a bunch of shit.
Bunch of shit. The thing I do believe is he waited 3 minutes to make sure she was dead, like you said. The court determined that in regard to the bullet casing and the blood spots, the court said that the admission of that evidence was not an error. So he didn't win on that in his appeal. He didn't win his appeal. He said it was necessary to show as accurately as possible the way that Betty was killed. That's what the court said. Regarding the claim that the district attorney was guilty of prejudicial misconduct, the court decided that it didn't prevent him from having a fair trial or result in a miscarriage of justice. So that was okay. So the court takes everything into consideration, and they determined that Frank's appeal was denied.
Denied.
Yeah, they determined that her death was deliberate and his sentence was justified by the evidence. So that conviction was upheld. And a request that he had for a new trial was denied.
Denied.
And at some point, Frank died because this was now like 75 almost years ago. But I don't know when. The stories that I saw online.
But he never got out of prison.
No, he never got out of prison. And I don't know what happened to Helen and Margaret
or
and
Betty
Raymond.
Jean, though.
I know. She's only 20. Here's just
being abused.
I know.
Mom leaves for a while.
Right.
Comes back. Knows Frank's gonna keep raping her.
I know, right?
He's already pointed a gun. Why?
Yeah, said he's gonna kill her.
I don't understand why the police. I don't understand a lot, but it was 1951 or something.
Yeah.
So
a lot of the details are missing, but like I was just trying to figure out like why was he planning to kill her in the first place?
What was his point?
I don't know.
Probably because she was gonna leave. She was getting more independent, and Margaret's there now.
Right.
And eventually it's all going to implode.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to have to implode. You can't have that kind of behavior continue.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. So
it's the psychology of it that really gets me.
Yeah, like, or he's losing control of her, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's his way to control, but
he can't let her go.
Sick.
I know.
He's sick.
Well, thanks everyone for listening to today's episode. And if you're watching on YouTube, thank you to True Crime Daily for hosting us.
Yes, thank you, Tanya.
No, thank you, Talia.
No, thank you. I insist on thanking you.
If you would like to hear more episodes that are not available to the public, you can go to tntcrimes.com or I'm sorry.
No, that's not it.
The wrong
Don't
website.
go there.
No, I'm sorry. It's patreon.com/tntcrimes.
Yeah, it's Patreon.
Yes, patreon.com/tntcrimes.
Crimes.
Sorry, it's early.
It is early. I don't like to record at 9 in the morning because it takes her and I until lunchtime. But you should see us after lunch.
We're amazing.
Like,
So you can go there, or if you listen to us on the Apple app, the podcast app, you can subscribe through there and you can get the same episodes as you would find on the Patreon website. And we release one episode, not to the public every week. And then we release the weekly episode that is free to everyone. We release it early.
Yes.
And ad free to our listeners on Patreon. You can go to our website. No, it's not.
What is wrong with you? You don't have coffee?
I'm sorry, everyone.
It's crimesandconsequences.com.
Yeah.
It's really easy. It's the name of our podcast.
Yeah, I know.
What is wrong with you?
I'm losing my mind today. And in the
you already lost. Girl, I know you. You already lost that a long time ago.
Being afraid that I'm going to mess anything else up, I'm just going to say goodbye to everyone. So thank you again for listening to this week's episode, and until our next episode.
Don't kill each other.
Bye.
Bye.